it's emerging as a huge problem as single households are increasing. So I would like to ask you a couple of questions. How does chronic loneliness affect an individual's physical and mental health over time?
And the latest World Health Organization report is very clear in there that loneliness is predicting early death. And it might be doing that because of the cardiovascular impact. It might be doing that because of poor physical mental health as well. Your cortisol raises when you're experiencing loneliness, and it's that impacts later cardiovascular health. Loneliness is also linked to other outcomes. And there we're talking about academic performance and also job success. So your life chances are impacted by experiences of loneliness. So and the more chronic that is, the more it persists, the more impact it has. And of course, if it impacts your school performance, that means you're not going to move into a job that pays well, which then means that your access to health care will be much lower than somebody who earns more money. So there are various ways in which loneliness can have an effect on life chances and health outcomes. So it's a really nasty cycle. And for me as a psychologist, it's about trying to almost come into that cycle and stop that process. What we don't want to do is get stuck in loneliness, because that's when it has these impacts on health and so on. It really isn't about the individual. There are certain things we can do to help the individual, but as I said, with all the skills, all the knowledge, if you don't have the opportunities and you don't have people that can support you, it's just not going to happen. So yeah, we have lots of things that we need to be doing beyond the individual to overcome both loneliness and social isolation.
Particular groups of people are more at risk of experiencing the
Middle-aged men as well. You see, that's interesting. We're not seeing that. It's not something I'm seeing in the news across Europe. It's not something I'm seeing in the UK. There's the odd story, but it is very, very rare. What we did do in the research was to highlight that there seem to be spaces, certainly in the West, where men are able to talk about their experiences. We don't see the same pattern that you're talking about in terms of social isolation and death that you are saying you get in Korea. What we called toxic masculinity, with the idea that there are expectations on men to behave and function in a certain way. I mean, there are of women as well, but for men, it feels still, even in our society where mental health is much more on the agenda, it feels that men have a harder time talking about their experiences. There still seems to be a belief, even online, that there are men should be strong. Men shouldn't be suffering from loneliness. They shouldn't be suffering from depression and so on. And that's incredibly isolating. So it feels like you already might have a mental health issue. You might already feel lonely, like you haven't got a group in which you belong. And then on top of that, you're actually then being isolated even more because you want to talk about it. Toxic masculinity is an issue everywhere, but it might be that you have certain cultural values that make it much harder in Korea as a man to be able to say you're feeling vulnerable. And I could see that making somebody isolate themselves much more. Even if they are healthy, I could see them, just not wanting to engage with others because of fear that they are different, and that there is something wrong with them because they feel depressed, or they've lost their job. So I think that it does sound like, certain values within your society may be contributing to that.
Intervention is needed is because it's not just a personal issue, right?
There are two things really, that we're talking about also this person's well-being throughout their life.
Right.
So, the thought that somebody could experience loneliness almost forever is heartbreaking,
Right.
and that person might miss out on, the wonderfulness of engaging with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's about we actually have a moral duty to do
Mm-hmm.
something. You as an individual will benefit. It's not just the person that we're saying we are worried about because they are socially isolated. You benefit too, hugely. I mean, we know through lots of work on kindness, we know that when people are kind to each other, yes, the person who receives the kind act, they benefit, you benefit too, hugely. We see much higher levels of happiness, life satisfaction. That's a really good thing. It's a good feeling. And certainly, given that we know loneliness and social isolation impact health, not only are you having to pick up the pieces when somebody dies, but also
Mm-hmm.
before then, the impact on our health systems and our health services is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do is to be thinking an investment now will actually have longer term impacts. In the recent World Health Organization report, they were very clear on what the bigger consequences are. I mean, if people are getting sick because of loneliness or social isolation, they're not engaged in work. So they're not contributing to the economy. They're costing the economy.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we know that loneliness is related to not voting, not
Mm-hmm.
volunteering, so society loses out because those individuals are not part of the system. In the worst case scenario, what we found is that loneliness is related to extremism,
Mm-hmm.
both political and religious extremism. And that's because these people will want to belong to something, and they're feeling very excluded from the political system in which they live. And these radical ideas provide them with that sense of engagement, that sense of belonging. My argument is that I don't necessarily think that that has to be a welfare issue. So I don't think it necessarily has to be about governments providing that. I think it's about us thinking about communities, and
Mm-hmm.
checking in on each other, realizing that we, as part of a community, have a responsibility to check on those people that we know live alone and actually might be struggling with that.
If you were to send one message to the broader public.
A coping mechanism that's very common
Mm-hmm.
across the human species is this withdrawal. When we feel very overwhelmed by stress, and that could be financial, but that might be other stress, we have a tendency to withdraw from that. And what I would say to friends and family is yes, give that person time to do that, but not too much time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think that's when we end up in these horrible situations where somebody, is sick and dies on their own. What we need to do is to think, okay, now they've had enough time to be able to think about their situation, and how they're going to move forward. So we have to do those regular check-ins. Most people, loneliness, some level of social isolation is normal. I think that's really important to know. The issue is about not getting stuck in that. That's when it impacts poor health. That's when it impacts survival. I think it's about communities coming together, communities offering support, offering kindness to enable individuals to come out of that experience. If everybody is like it in a capital city, they're just looking down, they feel that, no one's saying hello, you just get into that habit of being like that. And I think it often just takes one or two people to start doing things differently, to change the approach, because it's not nice looking at a pavement. It's much nicer to look at a smiley face. It makes us feel good, and I kind of almost think that by making that the norm, making that what we expect from each other is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. No, it's been lovely, absolutely lovely to meet you.